my name is Bethany Opp. I am Lauren's sister-in-law, and I'm going to be answering some questions that she sent me about adoption. Can you tell me about your experience with adoption? My experience with adoption has been very positive. I was adopted through Bethany Christian Services, and I know a lot of people through that connection and through family members and various other sources of people who have been adopted where it's not a good situation. I think my upbringing really attributed to a positive experience because my parents, I really don't know when they told me I was adopted. I mean, it's pretty obvious. I'm half black, my parents are both white, but from an early time, as long as I can remember, I've known I was adopted. And I think my parents did a really good job of not making it a big deal. Like, they never really talked about it in the sense that it was something weird or different. My parents were unable to have children, and so for them it was a really great opportunity. But, I mean, we make jokes about it, and my brother is half black. We're not biological, but both my brother and I are half black, and my parents are both white. And so there's just a really good environment just to be cool about it and to enjoy the differences that, you know, our family maybe isn't traditional in that sense. So my experience was really positive. My parents always were really open to answering questions and just talking about it. Like, they were open, and I think that's the most important thing. When did I first remember learning I was adopted? When I was adopted, I don't remember. I do know I was 2 days old, but I mean, I was telling people that I came out of a different mommy's tummy when I was like 4. So, like 4 or 5. So, as far back as I can remember, like, my parents have always been very open about it. We sent my birth mother a Christmas/birthday card for me because my birthday's the end of November. So every year she was collecting photos and setting them aside for my birth mother. So it was just something that, like, was normal for me, and I've just always known. Did you want to find your biological family right then, or did you not care to find them? That's a really good question. I always have known, since I read paperwork about my birth father, I've always known that he was out of the picture. And the way that Bethany Christian Services, I don't know if this is like a legal way, like all of American government, if this is like Bethany Christian Services because they are a Christian organization and they can do things the way they want, but they had it set up to where I could not find out certain information out of the privacy for my biological parents until I was 16. And so when I was 13 years old, that's when I started kind of asking questions. You know, what does my birth father look like? I'd seen pictures of my birth mother because we had the whole birth experience basically when my parents picked me up and stuff. That was all in my photo album. Like, that was a part of my life. We didn't, however, have any information about my birth father. And so when I was 13 years old is when I started asking questions, kind of doing my research, and I didn't get any answers. I did call my birth mother for the first time Easter 2007, and she told me a little bit about him, but she didn't really remember. And so really it was just waiting until I turned 16, and then I had an envelope delivered to me that had all my information. I just remember being so excited to open it up and read information about my half-sister, my half-brother, and my birth father. So after I found that out, I went on Facebook and I started finding people. That took me some time. That took a little while because it was something where it's like I knew that once I would open that door, I couldn't, you know, once you find out things about your biological family, you can't unfind them, you know. So you're kind of taking a chance by finding out the whole story of why you were given up. And so it took me a few years to really jump in and, you know, go ahead and research who my birth father was, try to get his contact information and all that. And once I did, my birth father was pretty receptive positively. The weird thing was he wanted me to thank my parents for taking care of me. And that's where the barrier between me being his biological daughter but not his daughter really started. It started being too much, because he was thanking me as if he had, as if they had done him a favor. And I normally don't get defensive about adoption. I'm not a very defensive person, I don't think. But when it came to that, I started really feeling him trying to grip me back in his life, saying he wanted me to come visit, wanted me to come do all these things. And he got emotionally, he was kind of aggressive. And so after I researched, he gave me a list of all my other siblings, and I researched them on Facebook, became really good friends with my half-sister and half-brother because he was married at the time, and developed those relationships trying to figure out my birth father. And after, he was speaking to me, and I had talked to their mother and my half-siblings, and I kind of put pieces together, I learned that he was, a birth father who he had a lot of girlfriends. And so I learned to not get my expectations up. And so I developed that relationship with a little bit of a wall, knowing that I shouldn't expect him to come into my life and get to know me, because he gave up the rights in the first place. You have to kind of remember, he gave up the rights. He didn't want to be a part of my life. He gave my birth mother money for an abortion, and so I couldn't expect him to be someone who's going to come at me with loving arms, which is not what I wanted. I was not intending to replace my parents at all. So with that being said, I don't really want to be my birth father. I've seen pictures of him. I've met some half-siblings, and that's good. That's enough for me. He's not a Christian. His lifestyle is definitely not something healthy for me to be around, or my son, or my husband. My birth mother, on the other hand, is a professing Christian, but she also is very active in a lifestyle that I disagree with, and I feel that if you are a Christian, you should not participate in that. For me, it's very black and white, and so that kind of put a damper on our relationship, because she's a very big mandate for that type of lifestyle. She pushes for it, and it's not something I agree with. And so, I see her on Facebook, we talk every once in a while, but, for me to meet my biological family, if we didn't have Facebook, it would be different, but I can see into my biological family's life. And I've learned over time with normal relationships and with adoption that you want to just let people into your life who are going to raise you up and people who are going to encourage you. And so my biological family is just that. They're my biological family. And none of them are strong Christians. None of them are in lifestyles that I want to surround myself with. And so for me, just seeing them on Facebook is enough. I get my answers. And I can make calls, I can write letters. But as far as meeting them, I've only met my maternal half-sister, and that was wonderful. She came to my wedding. I haven't met our brother, but I do plan to in the future. But otherwise, I really don't desire anything more than that. My parents handled mine and my brother's adoption really well. It definitely is a soft spot in their hearts because they were unable to have children, and so it's not like, my husband and I, we really want to adopt because I know how wonderful it is, but we've already had one child, so I'm already coming at it from a different perspective than my parents were. It's especially sensitive for my mom. I think it's really easy to talk to her. She's a great person to talk to, but it is sensitive. And when I kind of started this search for my biological family, I was very sensitive to my mom's feelings because I didn't want her to feel replaced. And I think really that's how, as the adoptive child, you should be. I think you should be sensitive to your adoptive parents, your parents' feelings about the issue, because when you're adopted, It doesn't involve just you. It involves your biological family, both the parents and their family. It involves you. It involves your mom and your dad and perhaps their parents if they were involved. It's a big circle of involvement, and there are a lot of feelings to be sensitive to. And so with that being said, my parents were very positive. They've always talked about, my birth mother in a positive light. They didn't know anything about my birth father, so they can't really say anything. But they've been really respectful to me and to my birth mother, and that's how I've learned to look at adoption with respect. How did you and your parents talk about your adoption with people outside your family? Again, it's not a big deal. I love that I'm adopted because it's different. It's a big deal to me, but it isn't. I have spoken at a handful of adoption get-togethers, meetings through Bethany Christian Services. My parents have been very open and welcoming to questions and concerns for prospective adoptive parents and adoptive parents with children wondering, what's it like when they're in college and when they get older. So my parents have always, no matter what it is, they've always been very open about it. And I think we do a good job of not making such a big deal out of it that Marcus and I, my brother and I, don't feel like, we're a natural part of the family, but yet we've talked about it very easily, very freely, in that that's just our history. Like, some people have a history with their parents biologically, and we have a history, through grace, and that's just how it is. So we've always spoken to it very openly with other people. We're proud of it, and we think that it definitely needs to be more positively spoken of in the community. How have you handled adoption questions and comments, both from your own family and from those outside your family? What kind of question comments have you gotten? Oh boy. Again, we've always handled comments and questions very positively. I have not received too many negative comments. There were times in high school where punk kids would be like, "No one loves you, Bethany, you're adopted." I did have some kids in middle school, tell me, there are people who don't understand it, and there are people who, if you haven't been adopted, it is weird. I mean, in a sense, it's kind of like you're buying children. I mean, that's kind of what it is. But there are people who just don't understand it, and it is confusing. Having already had my own biological son and having been adopted, they are two different relationships. And so, there have been some jokes, but overall, people don't really talk about it. Unless someone is interested in adoption, or, they're interested in psychology or family relationships, something like that, it's not something that people really talk about, which I wish they did. Because I feel like the media is always, I feel like on TV, if you see it, there's a teen pregnancy in a TV show, and she says, "I don't want to give my child up for adoption because I don't want to, grow up never knowing my baby ever again." And that's not true. That is not the case. There are open adoptions, and I think that's the biggest problem, is the people who have talked to me who are not coming at it from a "I want to adopt" perspective. They're just coming at it asking questions. They assume that adoption is this estranged relationship from your roots, where you came from, your biological family, and that you have this lingering ache. And I think some people do, because, their family, their adoptive family, didn't handle it as respectfully. But I think for the most part, people who are interested in adoption are very positive about it, whereas people who don't know about adoption, they're just asking to ask, they think it's a very weird situation. And I understand that. But I think we as adoptive kids need to be more active in saying, hey, adoption is great. It's not this estranged relationship. It can be a very open and loving relationship. And I think that's kind of my goal with doing interviews like this, to just get the message out there that adoption is wonderful and it's not this negative, horrifying, scary thing at all. How do you think adoption affects families? Oh, wow. From my experience, it has affected our family wonderfully. I think that's a loaded question because it depends on personalities. It depends on, I've known some families where they have 2 biological kids, 3 adoptive kids. Your biological kids can get jealous, your adoptive kids can get jealous, which is something Mark and I want to be sensitive to if and when the Lord allows us to adopt, since we already have, at least one biological child. But I think adoption has affected my family very positively. And I think overall, it really does affect families positively. The concern is, when you get children who have developmental issues, they've been abused, those situations can be very eye-opening. I've seen a lot of documentaries, I've known a lot of families who have adopted children with special needs, whether it's physical, mental, and that's something you don't, that's a really hard thing to adjust to. Because when it's your child, you've grown up with them all your life, you know their temperament, you know how they are. Biological kids, it seems to me like biological families always have really similar personalities, and I think it's easier to anticipate certain activities and gestures, whereas if you're bringing in a new child to your family, that biological connection that you don't have can definitely affect the learning process. I have been told, and I've heard this from pastors and psychologists, that there is a connection, there is an effect when you pull a child away from its biological mother. And I definitely can see that at times, because, if you let it get this way, you can feel like you're all alone. Nobody understands you because there's something about that biological bond. But as families who are adopting children and as children who are adopted, you have to work together. It can be a very stressful situation. My brother handled being adopted very negatively, but that was also due to external situations outside of our home that he brought into his life, that made him question everything. We also lived around some people from his biological family, and that could be very uncomfortable. And so I think it all depends on what age the child is when they're adopted. I think it depends on how open a family is. If you are adoptive parents and you are not open with your children, that is huge. You have to be open, you have to be vulnerable, because they have questions and they deserve to know. My grandparents are, they're older, they're in their 80s, and they will not give my aunt her biological information. And I think that's one negative thing, because people think, well, you don't need to know. I'm your parent, you don't need to know about your history. And that's wrong, because I know it's uncomfortable. You have to be open. And adoption can affect a family very negatively if there is not an overall understanding of love and trust and openness. And I think that is the biggest danger that I've seen in a family when, you realize that your history as a family is not as united, considering somebody may have come from another family, as opposed to if you're all biological and all your history was the same. You're all together all the time. So I think you just need to be sensitive, you need to be open, and things are going to go a lot more smoothly. Anything else about your experience with adoption that would be good to know? I think the important thing about adoption is to not make it a big deal. I've heard of people having adoption birthday parties, adoption parties, and I don't know how I feel about that. I'm leaning towards no, don't do it, because forever it's a reminder that you were adopted, you weren't part of our family. And maybe some people respond positively to that. I don't know, but I think there are a few things I think people need to remember when they're adopting, and that's your child has a right to know their history. I didn't know my medical history till I was 16 to 18 because I couldn't get the paperwork yet. I didn't know what my, just normal personality traits about my biological family that everybody else knew about their parents. My parents were very open, which was huge. You need to be open, and you just need to act normal. You're a normal family, and at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you have love. If there is love and there is openness, there will be peace. It can be a very sensitive subject because being adopted, people are adopted for all sorts of reasons. I was simply adopted because my birth mother was a single woman who unknowingly was with a married man. My brother, on the other hand, was adopted, and he was like the third child, and he was given up for adoption. And that's something that's a lot harder to deal with, because, it's like, well, why didn't you adopt me? Or why did you put me up for adoption? So there's just a lot of things that you need to know. But I think at the end of the day, you just have to go through your child one day at a time and treat them equally. And, as the adoptive person, respect your parents, because it is not an easy situation for them. Waiting to adopt a child is very stressful. And I think on both sides, if there is love and there is openness and honesty, I think you're going to be smooth sailing, minus all the other normal issues of raising a teenager and growing up. But it's a wonderful thing. It is not, like I said, it's not an estranged relationship from your roots. You have that option. If Mark and I are able to adopt, we will very much strongly advocate our birth mothers having open adoptions, meaning that we have an open relationship with them and it's not closed, meaning that we don't know anything about them. So, really, that sums it up. Thanks.